Right, welcome back. My friend Lucho had moved into the apartment. It was the start of my second year at Newton College. And we soon settled into a great routine. Lucho had a car, which was a very welcome addition to our household, and an iconic vehicle in the Newton College car park. You know, students all knew it. It was this incredibly bashed up old Nissan estate, beige Nissan estate, maybe cream coloured, I can't remember, that he called the Millennium Falcon. He loved movies, and I think he fancied himself as Han Solo, and I was perfectly happy under the circumstances to be Chewbacca, especially after a beer or two when perhaps I was less intelligible. And we did a lot of stuff together, although it must also be said he wasn't, and I found this over the years as a teacher at these expat schools, you'd have local folk who sort of wanted to buy into the foreignness, and that was definitely not Lucho. You know, he was a Peruvian who spoke pretty good English, which he learnt in his time at a seminary in the United States, I think. He had some interesting stories to tell, but he kept his cards close to his chest most of the time. We'd go for a beer after work to El Misty's, a wonderful garden bar restaurant that opened right next door to the school. And life was good. We had one particular popular activity on the drive home after school when life had been taking its toll in the education department. To cheer ourselves up, we'd stop off at a place, Polvos Rosados, the pink market. And there was a chap, Henry, who sold CDs, imported CDs, $20, but they were fantastic. I really, you know, anything that we'd be getting on sort of cutting edge music that we'd be listening to, he'd have it in stock. He'd open the CDs, play them for us, and we gradually built up quite an interesting collection. And we'd also, the other thing that we did quite a lot of as a sort of house activity was going to local gigs. I mean, Lucho loved his music, and he was very much in tune to what was, I wouldn't say fashionable, but what was on the edge in the sort of musical underground, and we listened to these bands, meet up with students there sometimes actually, and therein lied probably one weak spot of Lucho's, meeting up with students. The one night I woke up maybe 3 a.m. and I could hear voices in the lounge, so I put my shorts on, t-shirt, wandered into the lounge, and there were 3 of Lucho's Spanish class and Lucho sitting around the coffee table, and there's no point pulling out punches, passing a joint. Now, that definitely wasn't in any of the teaching manuals I read. You know, there were arguments in the British educational system when I studied teaching, to study for my PGCE. You know, people would talk about the bad old days when the advice was, don't smile before Christmas. You know, the first of 3 terms, you kept a stern face. Well, I never bought into that. But equally, the idea that you'd be friends with your students, and not just friends, but smoking partners, even if one of the chaps, Jose, could score the best weed at the best prices, that just, you know, that was just way over the line, wherever anyone chooses to draw the line. They offered me a joint. I said, no, I don't think so. We exchanged a few pleasantries, and then I made an excuse and setting out a football match the next day, which under normal circumstances certainly, wouldn't have stopped me cutting into my sleep, if an impromptu party was taking place. But yeah, this wasn't what I was looking for. And we settled into this very agreeable sort of life. I had my expatriate world. I had my entry into Peruvian, into a Peruvian cultural melting pot, where local sounds met with what was then sort of post-grunge, and I really was enjoying my life, and years 2 and 3 were absolutely fantastic. At the end of the 2nd or 3rd year, I had my famous trip down the Amazon with my friend Spencer. And I've mentioned that also in talks before, where we ended up in Iquitos. We found the worst pool tables in the world. We got a slow boat up the river, a madcap bus journey over land until we reached Roraima, the Tepui, the flat tabletop, prehistoric mountains on the Venezuelan-Brazilian border. Actually, Roraima had a 3-way border with Guyana, I think British Guyana. And from there we'd, Angel Falls and Ciudad Bolivar, and eventually we got to a place, Puerto La Cruz, where we decided to kick back. Spencer and I did a scuba diving course, which was a great experience. And we met a lot of interesting people. And one of the interesting people we'd met in a bar was an absolutely very vivacious, completely crazy Argentinian of Armenian extraction. I don't know what generation, whether it was 2nd or 3rd. She was an amazing character. I mean, a girl who'd sort of hitchhiked and bust her way across the continent, over the mountains, around the Pacific coastline, until she'd finally ended up in Venezuela and eventually in Puerto La Cruz. And we got quite friendly, Spencer and I, with Lorena, and she was on this amazing trip round South America. And as one does, if you've ever gone on these sort of long road trip type holidays, you make wonderful friends, and the idea is to stay in touch. And because they're more than just passing acquaintances, they're not telephone numbers that you've picked up in a bar. I've picked up my share of those over time. Whether they were actually the person's telephone number, of course, remains to be seen. Very often not. And sometimes when you do make the call, the person has absolutely no idea who you are and really wasn't thinking that you would call. But on these holidays, the people that we met and with whom we exchanged sort of contact details, the idea was that if we were ever in the same city, that we'd meet up again. And, by way of example, a Canadian couple that Spencer and I met in Ciudad Bolivar and eventually went on a couple of camping trips with, I eventually met them years later in Sao Paulo. So, you know, you'd meet people and you really would, the idea would be that you'd meet up again. We'd exchanged, and I remember very, very clearly because eventually I found it, we exchanged napkins, our details on a napkin in this restaurant one night when we were all going our separate ways. And off we went. And cut forward a couple of months, it was a Saturday afternoon. Lucho and I were sitting in the lounge, listening to music, chilling, you know, some beers and what have you. You know, I'll leave that to your imagination. When there was a buzzer on the door. Actually, it wasn't just Lucho and I. By then, Spencer had moved in. Our happy little home had become a threesome. No, not that sort of threesome, but there were 3 of us sharing. We had a small room on the roof, and Spencer had moved into that. So there were 3 of us, and Lorena moved in, and said hi. Well, I sort of got ahead of myself. She was at the doorstep. She said, "Hi, can I come in?" I said, "Sure, come on in." You know, she was continuing to travel, and she asked, "Do you mind if I stay for a few days?" And well, we didn't. And so she stayed. She was traveling very much on the very cheapest sort of think Jack Kerouac on the road style. So she certainly wasn't bringing fortunes from Argentina to the table, but she had, you know, she didn't want to be a freeloader, so she and she was quite upfront about that. She said, "Do you mind if I stay? Here I am. Next stop will be hitchhiking back towards Argentina, and maybe I'm going to find a job, maybe I'm not, who knows." She said, "No, don't worry about it, we'll take care of everything." You know, she'd do the dishes, we'd buy the food, and it was a very happy arrangement. She did a bit of cooking, we liked doing a bit of cooking. It was really, really good. We went out, I think of the many adventures that we had, the one that sticks out in my mind was seeing Jethro Tull at a local music venue, and it sticks out in my mind because of a very unfortunate event that took place at the end of the concert. They'd gone off stage and they were coming back on for their encore. Jethro Tull was Ian Anderson was going to do his this fantastic flute solo. He was standing on the raised drum section, playing his flute, leaped into the air very acrobatically, landed, and we all heard a very audible "oh fuck." He went off stage, tried to come back on again, couldn't manage it. It turned out he'd broken his leg. So that was a concert I'll never forget. Life carried on. And eventually, I think Lorena did go back to Argentina. Life seemed to go back to normal until it didn't. And that's where I'm going to pick up next week. So, as always, I trust you're safe and well, that you're making the most of the time that you have, whatever change, routines you might be undergoing. And until next week, from a sunny Brazil, ciao.